You're listening to the Loyalty Minute, the show that helps you build better customer loyalty and more valuable user engagement. With your host, Rob Gallo.
Welcome, loyal listeners, to another episode of the Loyalty Minute. I'm your host, Rob Gallo, and today I'm super eager and excited to chat with Ajay. Ajay has been an entrepreneur for many years, 35 years, in fact, as an executive and an advisor, delivering over 100 CRM, loyalty, and data-driven marketing programs across some 65 countries globally. He's now working with several startups, including Loyalty Caravan, Litmus World, Loyally, and Pixel. Welcome to the show, Ajay, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So for those who don't know anything about you or your background, if you could add a little bit of color to what I just announced, that'd be great.
So I got into loyalty about 35 years ago, just I think 4 years after American Airlines redefined loyalty into what we now understand as a card program. And you need to remember that this is a time before fax machines. So we had telex machines, and they were phasing them out and replacing them with fax machines. And they gave me a PC, not a PC XT. It didn't have a hard drive. It was just a PC. And they said, since you're the only guy in marketing who knows how to write code, will you go and start a loyalty program? And nobody knew what a loyalty program was. So we kind of figured it out, right? And as I said, I mean, there's no internet. We couldn't just Google saying, hey, tell us what American does. I mean, we vaguely knew there was this program somewhere in the US, and it was supposed to be something which just completely redefined marketing. And we kind of figured it out from base principles, which is fun. And so I actually started by doing data entry into databases, which I wrote. There were no database programs. I mean, DBase 2 came about a year later. Came to India a year later, or came to the company I worked a year later. So
right.
The initial database was actually programmed by myself, right? And so I went from programming databases to entering data. So I could type very fast indeed. And all those telex operators who used to, I don't know if you remember the old telex machines, used to type in real time, and somebody at the other end would read what you typed, and then they'd type back in real time. So they're very fast and very accurate typists. And since we didn't need them anymore with faxes coming down the pike, they became my core team. And in fact, they're still the core team in that company. I mean, so it's 35 years later, but they're still running the show over there, which is kind of cool. And we launched the first loyalty program, I think, outside of the US that I know of. And then I've been doing nothing but that since. So I set up one company and went broke in it, and then I set up another company and made a little bit of money out of it, and I did another one, and we did another one. We did doing work all over the world in loyalty, and so that kind of grew. And now that's basically all I've done, really. I mean, the last 35 years, just variations of the theme of CRM and loyalty.
So 35 years ago, what was I up to? I was probably in my early 20s. I remember the name telex. I got to be honest with you, I'd never used ones, but I understand the concept of it, but that's definitely before my time. I remember punch cards. To me, in the loyalty space, you'd go to a place and you get a punch card, literal punch card, and they would punch out. Once you get 10 of them, then you get the 11th one free. That to me was loyalty. Now it's obviously grown exponentially since then. And in fact, you mentioned American Airlines, and you think about what's happening in the US now with the airlines, and the number of points that they have in their systems are sometimes more than the company's value based on the revenue that they generate from the points. It's phenomenal, right?
Well, last I read, United.
Right? Yeah, United, they leveraged, I think, billions of dollars from their loyalty program to fund.
What I saw was that the value of the airline is $7 billion. And the value of the loyalty program, Premier Miles, was $19 billion.
Yeah.
Right. And so what you're talking about is the program is worth 2.5 times the airline. Right.
So it's incredible.
And I think it was, if I remember the number right, I think it's about 80%. No, I lie. I think it's about 88% of their revenue comes from the loyalty program. And 12% comes from actually flying planes or something like that.
It's crazy. Well, I just booked a flight using my points. It was, I think it was to Las Vegas. So we're going out to Las Vegas. I qualified for some poker tournament, and I used points. And I'm thinking, this is great. Even though I paid originally for airline tickets in the past and then accumulated points, but they also have other programs. I don't know if you're familiar with these, where I'm sure you are. Where you could shop online and then earn more miles,
Yeah.
right?
In fact,
Through
the
these
shopping online through COVID is the reason why the airlines are still alive and well. It's because
Yeah.
all your spending on Amazon, right, translated into airline miles on your credit card. And that's really what kept the airlines alive. I mean, which is why those ridiculous numbers of, you're really a loyalty program company, which happens to have a few planes and, a couple of pilots and maybe an airport or two attached. Right?
Yeah.
It's real.
But not even just on the credit card side, but if you look at, let's say, there's a company called Cartera Commerce that has the airlines industry locked up with the online shopping mall that's branded for Delta and United and Southwest and American. So if you're on American Airlines website, you could then go shopping. You click a button and you're taken to a mall that you could shop at Walmart, Kmart, Home Depot, buy everyday goods and earn airline miles for American Advantage.
And I guess, the guys who started this, if I remember right, were LoyalLogic out of Switzerland, weren't they? And then I think the guys in the US picked it up and, sort of just like with everything else in the US, just exploded and it became so big.
Yeah.
It was really
and they just sold to Rakuten. So Rakuten now owns them, the company that owns Ebates that turned it into Rakuten. So now they have the direct-to-consumer model, and now they just have the B2B model for other entities. In fact, I think they have Barclays Bank, they have Glamour, so anyone with a loyalty program could leverage the technology that these guys do. It's pretty incredible. Anyway, Ajay, I usually start the questions off with the first question for our guest is, how does Ajay Rowe think about loyalty from a consumer standpoint? And if you could form it in the form of a story that people would resonate, that would kind of resonate with people, that'd be great.
So let me let's take it step by step, right? I think loyalty starts with a preference, right? And the preference is typically some combination of rational and emotional, right? I like this brand for some emotional reason, and I prefer this brand for some rational reason. And sometimes it can be a little bit more of this, a little bit more of that, but there's got to be some reason why I prefer this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you move from preference to saying, well, I kind of like this, to I'm going to have this brand as far as I can get it, right? Now, I think Coke has got a terrific, used to have a terrific definition of loyalty, which is how far away from a cold Pepsi would you walk on a hot day to get a Coke? Right?
I love that.
It's blazing hot, right? It's I don't know how to do this in Fahrenheit, but I'll do it in centigrade. So it's 40 in the shade, 40 degrees centigrade, which is what I think 110 or 100 something like that.
Yes, 110ish.
110 years. So it's 110 in the shade, and you're going to cold Pepsi in your hand, and you're going to put it down, and you're going to walk for a Coke. How far would you walk, right? So if you'd walk 10 feet, that says something about your loyalty. If you'd walk 100 feet, it says something else altogether, right? So how much of an effort would you make? I mean, what would you give up in order to get what you prefer, right? And so that's call it the second phase. And third phase, I think, is, I've been married 30 years, so I'm allowed to say these things. Well, not really, but my wife's not listening, so that's all right. It becomes a habit, right? You stop thinking about it, you stop feeling about it, you just do it, right? You just use that airline because it's become a habit. You're just used to the systems. And the switching cost to you is just too high because it means relearning something, right? Yes. It means giving up a chunk of yourself, because when you go by another airline and your friend says, you should always fly, I don't know, United, and you're flying American this time, and you say, well, yeah, but, a part of you sort of, is belittled because you're not doing what you always do, right?
Yeah.
So, you follow what I'm getting at? So do you get a discount this time? Is that the reason why you're doing it? No, it wasn't a discount. It's just that they didn't have the hours that I wanted, right? They didn't have the timing. And, the friends say, yeah, we've heard that one before, right? So you understand what I'm saying? So when it becomes a habit, it becomes very difficult to let go of it, right? So yes. I think of my loyalty in those three phases, right? Which is move from a mild preference to a stronger preference to, a real reason why, and finally into a habit, right? Where it becomes very difficult to break. And if you think about all the things that you do, I mean, for example, when you don't need to think anymore, you don't need to feel anymore, you don't need to process, you just do. Mm-hmm. Right? Those are the things you're really, really loyal to.
Yeah. Well, if you think about, so there's a lot of, it's binary in certain instances where, let's say, iPhone and Android, right? You think of iPhone users. Now, I love Apple. I think Apple's a fantastic company, a great products. You can get customer service on the phone for $1 trillion company, which is amazing. And they'll walk you through setting up your iPad and all this stuff, which is phenomenal to me, right? But the iPhone, for whatever reason, I started on Android, and I've always been an Android user. As much as I love iPhones, and I think of people that I put myself in categories of an iPhone user compared to an Android user, and it becomes binary in certain instances where they won't even think about joining the other party. It's almost like a political divide, right? But when you think about Android, I don't necessarily think about Google, which is kind of weird. Even though they own it, I just think it's an Android because it's actually a Samsung phone. So it's a little bit different in that respect. But let me ask you, and I've never been to India, but what is the telephone market there? What is the cell phone market there?
Well, it's enormous. And I think we went from, if I'm not mistaken, I think there are something like 600 or 700 million smartphones which are internet enabled in India now.
Right.
So it's a massive market, right?
And what would you say the difference between, is it iPhone and Android, or is there?
Well, in India, for the vast bulk of people, it's Android, right? And then I was very interested to find, this was a few years ago before we got the spat with China and things changed. It wasn't actually an Android market, it was a UC browser market, right? Now, UC browser is a Chinese OS, right, on the cheap phones, which works like a poor man's Android. Right. And when we did Lippis World, when we launched Lippis World 5 years ago, so we built it for BlackBerry was still kind of around. So we actually did a version for BlackBerry on Nokia and Microsoft, right? So we did a version of that. We did a version of Android, of course, and a version of Apple. And the Android version just didn't work on about 40% of the phones. And we then discovered that what we thought were Android phones were actually UC browser phones. And UC browser looks a lot like Android. It behaves a lot like Android, but it isn't. Right. And then India went into being, call it a 70% UC browser market with the cheap Chinese phones, some crazy number. I'm not an expert on the subject, but there's some crazy number like that. And then we've got a bit of a argument going on with China now. So, so I think it's fallen dramatically to being 3 or 4% or something like that. It's really just dropped off the cliff. So now we're mainly, call it a 90% Android market.
And there's no iPhones over there?
No, there is the remaining 5 or 10%. But if you go to the top end, the wealthy people, that's almost entirely iPhone.
Yeah.
They're maybe it's, call it a 70%, 60-70% iPhone market.
Wow.
But remember, India's a very big country, right? Lots of people. So what we're dealing with is, huge numbers. So when we talk about the top end, right, you're talking in tens of millions of people. I mean, these are not small markets, right? It's not it's like the US or China. I mean, it's a massive market, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Interesting. I'm surprised Apple hasn't made a bigger impact. So what sort of brands are you loyal to? Like what sort of, I know you travel, right? You'll be in Dubai in a week or so, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I was planning to be, but I've had to pass on that. I had a bit of I've had a bit of a health problem, so I've got something wrong with my left eye, and so I've been asked not to travel and to take it a little easy for a bit. So so I actually pinged Ravindra and said, "Look, I'm really sorry, but I was really looking forward to it, but
well,
it'd be nice to get on a flight and go somewhere for a change."
Yeah,
we've been very locked in for a while, haven't we?
Yeah, I know. Well, soon enough, you'll be able to. So what sort of brands are you loyal to, right? Like just in general.
So I think, I'm okay. Let's take it geographically first, right? Let's start with restaurants. So I'm a great de-risker, right? Which drives my wife crazy because she likes to experiment and I don't. Okay. Now, I like to go to a restaurant and order that dish from that waiter because I know it works, right? And, as a de-risking strategy, what you know is that on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 is an awful experience and 10 is absolutely fantastic. If you go to that restaurant and have that dish, you're going to get a 9. right? So
Mhm.
why would you go somewhere else where there's an 80% probability you'll get less than 5 by ordering the wrong dish in the wrong place from the wrong person,
Mhm.
right? So my loyalty starts that way, right? Which is de-risking. Yeah. So anything which I can de-risk and know that I'm going to have, a positive experience, I'm going to go for that. So using geographic loyalty as a starting point, and then a temporal loyalty, that's the way I think about things. I'm very boring, unfortunately. Just that, I don't want to deal with stress. I
Yeah.
really don't want to deal with a bad experience. I just want to have a good experience. I know it's going to be a good experience. Sure, it means it's the 100th time I've been to that restaurant, but that's all right.
Well,
Right.
in and of itself, that is loyalty, Ajay.
That is
If you
loyalty,
think about
exactly.
it, that loyalty is the resistance to change. I think, like you mentioned at the top of the show, people don't like change. Generally speaking, they want what they want because they're accustomed to it. They know it. They see the brand, the McDonald's Golden Arches. They know it's bad for them. It's not healthy, but they know what to expect when they walk in. And that's part of, I think, what builds a brand's loyalty. So you talk about, what's the brand's value? The value of a brand is getting people to have that emotional attachment to their brand, regardless of the outcome, because they've built it in such a way that it becomes predictable, whether it's good or bad. So it reminds me of a Seinfeld episode. Elaine goes to a restaurant and she has a punch card and it's got 10 things and she's up to number 9. And Jerry asked her, how are the subs? How are they? She said, they're not that great, but I'm one away from a free one. So she just doesn't want to miss out. It's just
Well, I
so
missed
funny.
that one, but there are lots of them, right? In Seinfeld, you remember the soup guy, the
The
guy
soup
who does the
Nazi?
soup? Yeah, the soup
Yeah.
Nazi, right? I mean, I just keep going back to him. He's going to be obnoxious, but you just keep going back, right? I mean, it's
So the
something right.
quality of the food is good enough to get you to overcome all those other things. So
Yeah,
that means that if you think about that in the context of business, so our listeners are running small to medium sized, maybe even enterprise types of businesses, and they think to themselves, what do I need to do to attract and retain more customers? Right. So I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago, and I have to look it up and see again who it was. But he said it's not what you do. 50% is what you do. The other 50% is how you do it.
yeah,
So the what you do, I guess, in the soup Nazi's case was he made the best soup. How he did it was subpar, but people overlooked that. But I don't think in today's day and age, obviously that's a sitcom, I don't know how real that is, but in today's day and age, what you do is just as important, if not more, than how you do it. I mean, excuse me, the other way around, how you do it. So like I mentioned with Apple, you think about Apple, to get a $1 trillion company on the phone and them to call you by the first name and walk you through a process is amazing. I called my local hardware store, asked the guy if they have these certain light bulbs, and he wouldn't give me the time of day. And I'm thinking, you need my business. I could just go to Home Depot. I'm trying to do business locally with you. And the
yeah.
guy was obnoxious. So I said, all right, well, now I'm going to have to go to Home Depot. It's crazy.
But,
Anyway,
you put your finger on the rub, right? So 2 or 3 things which you said, I think. So the first thing is what you do, how you do it, and don't create a moment of abruption, right?
mhm.
A moment of abruption is when you ask yourself, why the hell am I doing this in the first place, right? Like if the guy's obnoxious, right? You immediately say, hey, look here, I'm trying to give you a business, and you want to be unpleasant to me. I mean, well, go and do the other thing, right? So I
Yeah.
think the key is to avoid moments of abruption. Don't allow the person to rethink it, right? Just consistently keep doing what's important, right? Now, on the subject of we'll come back to what you do in a minute, right? But let's talk about how you do it. I think most human beings, and when we launched Lipless World, we were told, "Oh, this India, you don't want to do this because all people are going to do is they're going to, be unpleasant. They're going to be pitching. I mean, you're not going to get anything other than negativity." We do 35 million conversations a month, as I was telling you, and 6 out of 7 are positive, right? Where people are very fair and they say, "Look, so and so did a great job, and I'm really thankful." Right?
Mhm.
Most people, I think, are fair. Yes, there are some people who get their rocks off by being unpleasant and being mean to people who are serving them. But most people are decent human beings who are respectful and thankful for some, like you are with Apple. I mean, you mentioned Apple 2 or 3 times, and you mentioned they're a $1 trillion company. I mean, it's obviously something which you're saying, hey, that's a good thing you guys are doing. You're recognizing that,
Mhm.
right? And you're recognizing it publicly on your show. which is kind of cool, isn't it? Now, there's so many people listening to the show thinking, yeah, I got to rethink that Apple thing, right? I mean, he didn't make that point, right? Now,
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that you want to do, which is you want to demonstrate you care, right? And a genuine demonstration of the fact that you actually care about the person's business is, I think, one of the critical things is how you do it. You may be incompetent, right? I mean, I'm not suggesting that being consistently incompetent is a good thing, but I think you could be incompetent. People will forgive you, right? As long as they believe that you're trying and you're doing the best you can, right? Everybody understands, the world's not a perfect place. Things do go wrong. And most people can be, I mean, there will be the odd terrorist who wants to be unpleasant, but I mean, most people are just, yeah, we get it. I mean, you're going through a bad day, the serving staff in the restaurant, she drops a little soup on your lap. I mean, she's going through a bad day. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, there's no point in screaming at her, right? I mean, she didn't do it intentionally. I mean, so most people would say, well, that's all right, right?
Yeah.
And you get on with it. It doesn't mean you're never going to go to the restaurant again. Now, if I asked you a question and said, hey, what would stop you going to the restaurant again? And I gave you a list of options, and one of them was hot soup on your lap, you'd probably take that one and say, I'd never go back again because of that, right? So when you look at it rationally, there's a reason why not to go. But when you look at it emotionally, when she's saying, I'm so sorry, sir, I really didn't mean to do that. You say, she's having a bad day. I mean, poor thing. She's only a kid. I mean, she's 20 years old. She's working this while she's doing college. I mean, forget it. It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
You understand the difference where the emotion begins to take over and you start saying, as long as she's trying hard and she's doing what she should be doing, by and large, you're all right. Now you come back to the what you do, right? Now, the what you do, if you don't have that emotional, how you do it kind of dimension to it, right? Now, it's complex because there's rational in the how you do it and there's emotional in the how you do it. And there's rational and there's emotional in the what you do as well, right? Now, for example, let's say you buy a bar of P&G soap, right? And it promises you all kinds of emotional benefits. You're going to be looking really fantastic tomorrow, right, when you use that soap, and that's terrific. But the darn thing doesn't clean, right? So, I mean, the rational benefit is not being served. So the emotional benefit may be terrific, but, I'm not getting what I wanted out of the soap, which is I want to get dirt off, right? And it's not doing that. So, you're probably going to, not look at that. But aside from those extreme examples, right, if you think about, let's take a hotel, right? And you have a check-in process, which you're used to because you just keep going to the Marriott and, the Marriott's got a way of doing it and you show them your card, you stand in the special queue and you get your upgrade and, it just goes that way, right? And, as long as they're not mechanical and they smile at you once in a while, you're perfectly happy with that, right? And rationally, it works for you, right? And you don't necessarily want to be their new best friend, do you? Right? I mean, if they do actually smile at you, that's fantastic, but you just got a flight, you've been flying for 8 hours, you're bone tired, and you really don't want somebody who wants to be your friend at the reception. You just want, can you get me to my room as quickly as possible, right?
Yeah.
But that smile does make a difference, right?
Absolutely.
And you've had a rough flight. I mean, welcome here, and it's really great to have you. And let me get to your room as quickly as possible. So the how you do it and what you do both matter, right? And I think the emotional bias in the how do you do it is slightly greater than the rational bias in what you do. Right? Does that kind of make sense? No, of course.
Yeah, and I've heard in years and years ago that every decision that's made from a human being is emotional, but backed up by rationality. So every decision that's ever made is first emotional. So if you think about brands that are out there, what are they doing to tap into people's emotions, right? Like Best Buy or Home Depot or Petco, to tap into the emotion of a pet owner to bring your pets to Petco because that's where the pets go. They create an emotional attachment, but then you back it up with logic and reason to say, well, it's cheaper than PetSmart. They treat me nicer than PetSmart, right? So what would you think in terms of how? So let me rephrase this, Ajay. When you work with companies that you work in their loyalty space and help them create loyalty, how much time is devoted to creating the emotional connection with their brand prior to the rationality of I'm going to get a discount or a better price or points off for something? How much do you think about that when you discuss?
That's a difficult question. I don't know how to answer it without being politically incorrect. So I'm going to go ahead and be politically incorrect. I hope that's all right. Right.
Fine.
I think a lot of lazy marketing, right, is around deals, right? And the first refuge of an incompetent marketer is to do a price off, right? Oh, they won't buy it at $100. Okay, let me give them $20 off, right? maybe they buy at 80. Oh, they didn't buy at 80. Let's do a really wild marketing promotion and do it at 70. Right? I mean, that's marketing genius in a lot of people's minds, right? But I think the companies which think about it very closely, right? I mean, like Apple, for example, and they
no discounts ever.
No discounts ever. Don't
Never.
need it. Because there's always a reason to buy, which is 90% emotional because it's the kind of person I am. It makes a statement about who I am, right? So you identify, to the point that you made earlier, right? When there's this Android Apple divide, right? You identify yourself as being an Apple kind of person, right? And let's face it, right? The why of the Apple is very wrapped up in the why of the person, right? You believe yourself to be almost like a superior human being. You care about design. Now, I've got a family which is completely Apple crazy, right? I mean, they all have Apples. And I have an Apple phone, and I enjoy torturing my wife and children by pointing out the design flaws, right? So I don't know if you notice this, but an iPhone that's got a little moon, right? Which becomes full or wanes, according to, whatever Apple has decided it's got to be according to.
Right.
Genius. Except it's got nothing to do with the time of the day. It's got nothing to do with the phase of the moon. It just does it on its own trip. So you've built this thing of genius, which would be so cool. But haven't you thought of linking it to the clock on your goddamn phone? I mean, what are you guys thinking, right? I mean, so these little things like this, right? Where do you close the screen from? And in some Apple programs, it's on the top right. Some it's on the top left. But it's not consistent. Whereas Android, it's consistently in the top right. Whenever you want to close the screen, you go to the top right, and you have that little cross. It's consistent, right?
Yeah.
So what is the design genius about not being consistent about where, but you know where it is if you use an Apple. Yes, of course you do. But it's not good design, right? But despite that, they've convinced the world and his brother that they're fantastic at design. Right? I mean, and just think about this. And they managed to convince people that even their clumsiness, which is we're not sure about what to do with that moon, or we're not entirely sure which side you should click to shut something. It really depends on the designer who did that. Right? Has become an asset. I mean, because people, they don't forgive them. They say they've got a reason for doing it, which must be fantastic. They'll never admit, an Apple user will never say it's just because they're incompetent. Right? They didn't get around to thinking this through. Right? They never say it.
That's
I'd
funny.
probably get struck down by some kind of thunderbolt by this $1 trillion valuation company for saying this. But have you noticed this? And when you start making excuses, right, when it becomes so wrapped up in yourself, right, just think about that a minute. And that's really where you want to be with a brand, right? Where people are now justifying to themselves why they identify themselves with your brand. Now, if you can make that happen, right, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of behavioral economics which goes into it. And, ever since Kahneman taught us about thinking fast and slow, and, Taylor taught us about, there's a lot of stuff out there about how you can nudge people into thinking and feeling the way you want them to think and feel, right? Yes. And the good brands spend a lot of time doing that, right?
Starbucks is a brand that does exactly that. You are a Starbucks aficionado paying $5, $6 for a cup of coffee. And I don't drink coffee, but I understand from a brand perspective how they've created a culture around what it is that they do. Their loyalty program, I think, has probably close to 20 million people in it that are earning reward points, but they're just, they're brand zealots. They just absolutely love Starbucks brand. And so that's the difference. I think on a very cold day, it's, let's say, -10 centigrade, and people are going to have a regular cup of coffee, but they'd have to walk, 10 meters for a Starbucks, or 100 meters. How far would they walk? The brand loyalist will walk miles.
Yeah.
Before drinking a regular coffee.
I must tell you about Starbucks. I did a loyalty program for them in the Bay Area. It was when I used to live in the Bay Area, and we did a really cool loyalty program for Starbucks. Basically, you pre-bought 10 cups of coffee or 20 cups of coffee or whatever it was, right? You could buy as many as you want. And it would be programmed with your preference, right? So you buy a card. Let's say you wanted a Frappuccino with extra chocolate sprinkles, or whatever the heck it was that you wanted. That would be pre-programmed in your card, right? And all you had to do was you swipe the card when you walked in, right? And the machine would let the person at the counter know this is what you wanted, right? and it would debit to your card because you prepaid it, right? And I thought it was a brilliant program because I had a lot of trouble with my accent and the Starbucks staff in the Bay Area at that time. Their accents, we couldn't understand each other, right? I thought I was saying Americano really clearly, and they didn't think so at all, right? I mean, I'm sorry, and it would be quite a challenge, right? So I thought this program was absolutely brilliant, saying that you just take away the waiting, you don't have to wait in the queue. You swipe your card and you just go and you collect the coffee you want, right? And they bombed it, right? They ran it for a few months. I think we ran it for 6 months or something like that, and then they shut down the program. And then they relaunched the program. I mean, some years later, they relaunched the program that they now have, right? At that time, I was really quite annoyed with them, saying, look, we gave them this genius program, right? And they killed it. Subsequently, I realized that, the Starbucks experience, and whoever made that decision to kill that program was actually a lot smarter than I was. Because I think he or she understood that, the Starbucks experience has got the waiting in the queue, the little communication with the barista about, how you want your coffee, maybe that little smile. And they understood by converting, card swipe experience, it wasn't Starbucks anymore, right? Which I didn't understand. And that only sunk in, maybe about 10 years later when, they launched this program, the present program that they now have. And say, okay, now I get it. Now that's the reason why because they had a good understanding of what makes their brand, right? And which
I mean,
kind of insensitive too.
There's an old adage that people go to restaurants where other people are. So if they see a crowd or a line at Starbucks, so I'll walk through the airport and they'll have, a Starbucks there and there's a queue, 20 people deep waiting for a Starbucks. And I think that's part of the allure. People want to be a part of that, right? That's part of it. It's interesting. All right. So let me. I know we've been on for quite a while, and I don't want to. We usually try and keep it around 30 minutes. Let me ask you this, Ajay. What sort of actionable advice could you give to our listeners that they can employ today as a small to medium business size owner that would enhance and improve their loyalty programs?
Okay, so I guess the first thing is to use the loyalty programs, right? Now, a lot of people see loyalty programs as a boat in the water, right? The tide goes up, the boat goes up, the tide comes down, the boat goes down, right? As opposed to that, think of a loyalty program as being a dam, right? Which controls the flow of the water, right? And so what you really need to do is you need to figure out what are the actions I can take on my loyalty program, which have significant impact on the business by having a significant impact on my customer, right? So you think about it. I've got data thanks to my program, right? I've got transaction data, I've got profile data, I've got some interaction data, all related to a loyalty number. Let me look at that data and say, how would I use that to drive the business forward by driving the customer experience, into a better zone, right? So if you use me rarely, how can I get you to use me more frequently? Here's how. Here are 3 programs. Test them. See which one works the best for you. And the one that works for the best for you would be, yes, of course, you get a lot more business, and that's what we're here for. But also, they make the customer prefer you and want to keep coming back to you, right?
Yeah.
So the first piece of advice would be, really, you've got an asset, use it, right? A lot of people, and these include some of the largest companies, right? Don't use the loyalty program except as a means of spamming their members, right? And they'll just slam, communication with the members saying, okay, you're foolish enough to sign on to my loyalty program. You deserve all of what I'm going to send you. And so I'm going to send you 10 messages a day, and, hopefully somebody will see something and do something.
Yeah.
And that's really lazy marketing, as opposed to, I think a good question to ask yourself is, I know why I want to talk to the member. Why does he want to hear from me on this subject at this time? And if you don't have a darn good reason, and the reason can't be, because he loves my brand, he signed on to me once and he loves me. No, that's not a reason. There's got to be a strong reason why his life gets better as a result of that piece of communication which you give him at this time, or her life. Sorry, I don't mean to be sexist. I mean, his, hers, whatever, right?
No, I agree. I think you're spot on with that, Ajay. And in fact, it reminds me of a story. I went to Foxwoods with my wife and I. This is probably 7-8 years ago. And I went and played poker, and she was playing slots. So we got back And 3 days later, maybe 4 days later, we got a piece of mail. I got one about other poker tournaments. They had the calendar on the back. She got one about slots promotions and stuff like that. So it was speaking to the people about what they wanted to hear. And I remember even 15, 20 years ago, people were talking about, well, if they're already a slots player, why would you promote slots to them? Why wouldn't you tell them that they can play craps or they can play roulette? If they're slots players, they want to play slots, right?
Yeah.
So speak to them the way they know. So like Starbucks, I think that was on the right idea with what you mentioned before, where if they know you like a chocolate latte with sprinkles, they should have a chocolate latte with sprinkles as number one on the list for you when you come in. They don't want to try and get you some peppermint thing that you're not going to like, right? So speaking to a consumer as to how they intended to be, addressed and what they like is probably one of the strongest bits of advice.
Yeah. And I think that's really that can make a huge difference. And if you're going to give them what they want and you do it well, and they know that you're trying to be a help, you're not just trying to sell them. Because I think all of us have got a bullshit filter and a sales filter.
Yep.
And I mean, we just shut off, don't we?
Yep.
Right. And we're not paying attention anymore. So what you really want to move from that zone into saying, when I hear from this guy, he's talking to me about something I want to hear about. Yes, I'm going to give him money. That's fine. But he's going to get me the right poker game at the right time, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of cool.
Yeah, very cool.
I guess that's really the single most important thing, which is use it effectively. It's a heck of an asset, right? But, use it the way it should be used as an asset in order to get a disproportionate return on your investment by adding some value to your customer's life so that, he or she actually looks forward to hearing from you.
Agreed. Yeah, I completely agree. Great stuff. Listen, Ajay, we could talk about this forever. I know you could, and I know I could. But if listeners want to get a hold of you, what would be the best way they could do that?
Well, email, I guess, ajayrow at gmail.com, ajayrow@gmail.com, LinkedIn, or, just ping me. I try and respond to everybody, and I'm more than happy to share whatever little I've learned, in any way I can.
Little you've learned. 35 years, you've learned more than most people will forget. That's great stuff. Again, I want to thank you for taking your time. I know it's late in the evening for you over there, but I want to, again, I think our listeners really appreciate the value and the insights that you've given. To our listeners, if you think you've gained some value from listening to the show, please do share. That's how we grow. If you're listening to any of the other podcast streaming services through Spotify or Google or Apple, please do give us a 5-star review. That helps out the show tremendously. To reference this and other Loyalty Minute episodes, please visit theloyaltyminute.com. Thanks again, Ajay.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for your next edition of the Loyalty Minute.